Devil's deception. The Quran, dear brothers and sisters, is a very concise book. And bearing in mind the thousands of happenings that have taken place in history till our time today, the fact that the final testament, the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, is only comprised of 114 chapters, means that it is a real summary of the best of everything you and I need to know from that history. And therefore, when Allah Jalla Jalaluhu documents for us a story in the Quran, know very well that this has been divinely selected from the many stories that could have been selected, and the countless happenings of the past. Thus Allah said, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ. We relate to you, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of all stories. And one of those stories which Allah Jalla Jalaluhu eternalized for us in His final book is the story of a community known as the community of Saba. A community whom Allah Jalla Jalaluhu had given everything that man could wish for in the life of this world. You can really call it a kingdom of heaven here with us in dunya, or at least it was. A people who were deceived by shaitan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said about them in chapter 34 of the Quran, Surah Saba, لَقَدْ كَانَ لِسَبَإٍ فِي مَسْكَنِهِمْ آيَةٌ. There was indeed for the people of Saba in their homelands, there was a sign. What is the nature of that sign? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose to make their story eternalized in His book? What was the nature of the blessing that they had? And why was it changed? These are some of the questions that we look to answer today in our pursuit of discovering some of the techniques that shaitan uses when he looks to deceive man. This is simply a case study illustrated by the Quran. Saba is the name of that community that existed once upon a time in Yemen. And Balqis, if you've heard of her, who existed during the time of Sulaiman sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was part of that kingdom at some point in history. And they were a people who worshipped Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. And Allah had blessed their civilization in ways that are most breathtaking. And Allah would send them messengers, and their duty was to benefit from the khair that Allah had given them and just to be grateful to Allah. And this is something they did for a certain particular amount of time, but then they changed. And so the blessing of Allah that He had given them also changed. Imam Ahmad narrates in his Musnad on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas that a man asked the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam about Saba. ما هو أهو رجل أم امرأة أم أرض. What is Saba? What is Saba? What is it attributed to? Is it the name of a man? The name of a woman? The name of a land? He said to him, بل هو رجل من اليمن ولد عشرة سبعة منهم في اليمن وأربعة منهم في الشام. He said, no, Saba is the name of a man who lived in Yemen, and he had 10 children. 6 of them stayed in Yemen, 4 of them went to Asham, Greater Syria. He said, كلهم عرب, all of them were Arabs. He said, as for the 6 who were from Yemen, they are Mathij and Kinda and Azd and Al-Ash'ariyun, Himyar and Mar. As for the 4 who are from Sham, he said they are Lakhm and Judham and Ghassan and Amila. All of these people were the children of Saba, but as Imam Ibn Kathir, he said they weren't necessarily his immediate children, maybe his descendants at some point. This is where Arabs come from. They are rooted to this man called Saba, who was the son of Yashjub, who was the son of Ya'rub, thus they are called Arabs, son of Ya'rub, who was the son of Qahtan. And they lived in Yemen, and they had a dam that had behind it water that they benefited from. But when Allah released that dam, as we're going to find out today, they were dispersed in the land, and so 4 of the 6, they went to Syria, and that was the beginning of the presence of Arabs in Greater Syria when the Sed of Yemen broke down, the dam broke down. لَقَدْ كَانَ لِسَبَإٍ فِي مَسْكَنِهِمْ آيَةٌ, Allah said. Indeed, there was a sign for the people of Saba within their homelands. جَنَّتَانِ عَنْ يَمِينٍ وَشِمَالٍ. They had 2 gardens, one to the right, one to the left. Imagine, dear brothers and sisters, the people of Saba, all they ever saw was a green landscape. All they ever inhaled was disease-free air. All they ever ate from was the most ripe of fruit and vegetables. All they ever experienced was safety and security. There was, dear brothers and sisters, a trouble-free environment Allah had blessed them with, a kingdom of heaven here on earth. And all that was required of them was to thank Allah. Their messenger said, كُلُوا مِنْ رِزْقِ رَبِّكُمْ وَاشْكُرُوا لَهُ بَلْدَةٌ طَيِّبَةٌ وَرَبٌّ غَفُورٌ. They said to them, eat from the provisions of your Lord and thank Him. You have been given a pure and sweet land and a very forgiving Lord. Imagine, what more could you want in the life of this world? A land that wants to give, and you have a Lord who wants to forgive. What more? Imam al-Baghawi narrates in his tafsir that Muqatil and As-Suddi, they both said, describing the greatness of these gardens Allah had given them. They say, كانت المرأة تحمل مكتلها على رأسها فتمر بالحديقة فيسقط في مكتلها من الثمار والفواكه ما الله به عليم فيمتلئ من غير أن تمس بيدها شيئا. He said, a woman would pass through these gardens of Saba, and she would carry a basket on her head. He said, and the fruits would fall off the trees by themselves. And by the time she walks out from the other side of the garden, that basket would have become filled with ripe fruit without her needing to extend her hand and pull down any fruit by herself. So ripe were the fruits that they simply couldn't wait to be picked. This is what Allah had given them. But however, dear brothers and sisters, they began to change. They got a little bit comfortable with Allah had given them, and they began to challenge their messengers. The worship of Allah became the worship of the sun, and they got, in short, bored, tired with the favors of their Lord upon them. So Allah said, فَأَعْرَضُوا. They turned away. So what was the outcome? فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ سَيْلَ الْعَرِمِ. We sent upon them the dam. We opened against them the flood of the dam. And this was the end of their civilization. Their trees were uprooted. Their homes were flattened. Families were desecrated, dispersed in the land. What was once a unified community of happiness, paradise on earth, became a fragmented, fractured, dispersed, disunited community here on earth. وَبَدَّلْنَاهُمْ بِجَنَّتَيْهِمْ جَنَّتَيْنِ ذَوَاتَيْ أُكُلٍ خَمْطٍ وَأَثْلٍ وَشَيْءٍ مِّن سِدْرٍ قَلِيلٍ. Allah said, and because of their turning away, we replaced them, the 2 beautiful gardens that they had, with 2 other gardens. Of what? Of bitter fruit, tamarisks, few lote trees here and there. ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِمَا كَفَرُوا وَهَلْ نُجَازِي إِلَّا الْكَفُورِ. This is what we did to them because they were ungrateful. And do we behave with people like this only when they are ungrateful? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these ayat goes on to tell us yet another favor that He had given the people of Saba before the destruction, before the opening of the dam. He said, وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ الْقُرَى الَّتِي بَارَكْنَا فِيهَا قُرًى ظَاهِرَةً. We had placed between the people of Saba in Yemen and the blessed land, Asham, clear cities, visible cities along the way. What does that mean? The people of Saba in Yemen, they had business routes from Asham and back. But what else did they have? They had pit stops along the way. But these weren't like restrooms or service stations like on the M4 and the M5, or you get a Costa and a burger. No, they had cities. These were their rest places. So that means that when they would leave their homes from Yemen to get to Asham to trade, they never needed to take with them any luggage at all. Just walk out the house. Where are you going? Corner shop. No, I'm just going to Yemen. I'm just going to Asham. They would enter one city, rest, eat, drink, move, enter another city, eat, drink, rest, and then move, all for free till they get to Yemen, Asham, and then back to Yemen. You may be asking, what about navigation? How did they know their way? Allah said, we took care of that as well. وَقَدَّرْنَا فِيهَا السَّيْرِ. We determined the distances between those cities. What about safety, you may say? Should they travel by day or not by night? Allah said that was also taken care of. سِيرُوا فِيهَا لَيَالِيَ وَأَيَّامًا آمِنِينَ. Allah said, travel within it during the day, during the night, and you will be in a complete state of security. But they got tired with the favors of Allah, so they made a very strange dua that when you hear it, you will say, how? فَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا بَاعِدْ بَيْنَ أَسْفَارِنَا. They said, oh our Lord, we ask you to make the distances in our journey very long. A'udhu billah, Allah said, وَظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ. They wronged themselves with that type of dua. In other words, oh Allah, life is too easy. We want to pack luggage like everyone else when we travel. We want to experience the heat of the sun. We want deserts. We want an arid environment. We want thirst. We want hunger. It's too easy, Ya Rab. We want the fatigue of life as well. Oh Allah, please make the distances of our travel very far. You may think to yourself, what type of maniac psycho would make this type of dua against himself, herself? Believe me, dear brother, dear sister, this is a quick footnote before we continue. If you look around you, you will realize that many Muslims are making this exact same dua, but through their behavior almost on a daily basis. How? Consider the situation of a brother or a sister whom Allah Jalla Jalaluhu had provided them with a righteous spouse, dutiful to Allah, dutiful to you, dutiful to your children. But despite this goodness, this luxury Allah has given you, you start pursuing a conversation offline or online beyond the limits of marriage. What do you call this? We call this an individual who has got bored with the favor of Allah. Or another person whom Allah had blessed him or her with a steady income from halal, enough to raise a roof, enough to feed himself and his family, enough to give zakah. But then he decides out of the blue to open up maybe a shisha lounge or a club or a business run on alcohol or interest. Why did you need to do that? Because that is a person who got bored with the favor of Allah. They said, oh Allah, please make the distances in our travel so long. Allah said, they wronged themselves. So what was the outcome? Dear brother, dear sister, if this is you, beware of the outcome similar to that which was affected by the people of Saba. Allah said, فَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث. So we changed the community of Saba into a story. Look at that description, La ilaha illallah. We made Saba into a narration. What was once a visible power, kingdom, place, real life, something you can touch, benefit from it, became a tale now that we narrate to one another. وَمَزَّقْنَاهُمْ كُلَّ مُمَزَّقٍ. And we tore them apart. We dispersed them, a total dispersion in the land. This is when the 10 children of Saba, they left Yemen. 6 who decided to stay and 4 who traveled to Asham. This was their first arrival in Asham, the Arabs, when that dam was made to break open. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes the story by telling us that not everybody will benefit from this story. Not everybody will benefit. He says, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِكُلِّ صَبَّارٍ شَكُورٍ. There is a sign in this story for every individual who is patient and grateful to Allah. There are some things in Islam that are haram, prohibited. They require patience. And other places where Allah has given us space to enjoy that requires gratitude. These are the people who will benefit from the story of Saba. These are the people who will weep when they hear this story. These are the people who will consider how to reform their financial transactions, their secret relationships, their outward behavior. when they hear the story of Saba, the patient, the grateful. Dear brothers and sisters, this story is not the only model given by the Quran with regards to gardens that Allah took away from its owners when they misused the blessing of Allah. In the Quran, there are at least 3 stories or 4. One story that speaks of the man who had 1 garden. The second story that speaks of those who had 2 gardens. And a third story that speaks of those who had many gardens. The outcome was the same. As for the story of the man who had 1 garden, this is found in Surah Al-Qalam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concluded that story by telling us his property was taken away by Allah. Allah said, فَطَافَ عَلَيْهَا طَائِفٌ مِّن رَبِّكَ وَهُمْ نَائِمُونَ. A visitor from your Lord visited that garden at night when they were asleep and destroyed their garden. That was the end of that garden. As for the story of the person who had 2 gardens, you heard that in Surah Saba. And there is a second story in Surah Al-Kahf of he who had 2 gardens. What was the outcome of that? وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ. His garden was encircled with destruction. He misused the blessing of Allah. That was the end of that garden. What about the story of he who had many gardens? Who is he? Do you know, brothers? Do you know, sisters? You know him. He is the Pharaoh. Many gardens. What was the outcome? فَأَخْرَجْنَاهُمْ مِنْ جَنَّاتٍ وَعُيُونٍ. And so we exiled him from the many gardens and the many springs they had. 4 stories belonging to 4 different individuals or communities in 4 different times in history, and the outcome for every single one of those 4 stories is identical. And that is because Allah Jalla Jalaluhu is sending across to you and I, dear brothers and sisters, and this is the conclusion of this reminder. One core key message that you and I are required to take from these stories, which is Allahu yu'aqibu bi idhabin ni'mah. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will punish by taking away blessings from your life. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, وَالْقُرْآنُ يُبَيِّنُ فِي غَيْرِ مَوْضِعٍ أَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى لَمْ يُهْلِكْ أَحَدًا وَلَمْ يُعَذِّبْهُ إِلَّا بِذَنْبٍ. He said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it clear in more than one passage in the Quran that Allah does not punish a people or cause them to suffer except when a sin is involved. But who will benefit from this reality? Those who are patient, those who are grateful. You may say to Brother Ali, what is patience and what is gratitude, so that we apply them, so that our blessings stay with us. Ya akhi, I care about my vision, I care about my hearing, I care about my children, I'm happy with my Islam. I don't want any of these things to be taken away from me. So what is patience and what is gratitude, so that I don't suffer the same fate as the people of Saba? As for patience, the scholars of Islam, they say it is of 3 levels, as you know. Patience towards the obligations of Islam. Patience towards the prohibitions of Islam. Patience towards qadar, those elements of decree that may cause you pain. If you and I tick those 3 boxes, we are in the eyes of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu amongst the patient. You may say, so what is gratitude? Because the people of Saba were not grateful. 3 categories as well. As for the first, it is to show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your heart, so that you believe inside of you that every khair Allah has given you, it is from Allah. وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Not through my degree, my hard work, my sweat, my experience. Your heart knows it's from Allah. That's the first pillar of gratitude. The second, they say it's the pillar or the gratitude of the tongue, whereby you are always speaking about the favors of Allah. It is Allah. He is so kind. He has given us. He has dressed and clothed us. Not me and my experience and my business. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. And as for the third pillar of gratitude, they say it is the gratitude of the limbs. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never sees you using your hands, your eyes, your private parts, trespassing the limits of Allah. اعملوا آل داود شكرا. And these are therefore the 3 pillars of gratitude. Brothers and sisters, in conclusion, if you and I walk away after hearing such a story and the other stories we have heard today, without making changes to those private relationships you may have behind closed doors, those ones that you are aware of, I may be aware of, then it means that we have not shown patience and gratitude. And it could be therefore that we are also awaiting a similar fate that the people of Saba experienced, a flood of some sort. If a person walks away from this blessed conference not rethinking his finances, for example, his investments, his sources of income, those aspects that are halal and those aspects that are at least doubtful, that person hasn't shown patience, he hasn't shown gratitude, and he may be awaiting the exact same fate as the people of Saba. If we, dear brothers and sisters, walk away from this blessed conference and we're yet to make Allah Jalla Jalaluhu the number one priority in our lives, then it means we haven't shown patience and gratitude. It could be that we are awaiting the exact same fate, a flood, whatever the nature of that flood may be. But we don't want to be like that person. We don't want to be an individual who awaits the growth of tumors, or the appearance of cancer, or the loss of children, or the deterioration of wealth, or the loss of sanity, or the loss of iman, or the loss of anything that we may cherish, for us to realize that we now need to make changes like the people of Saba had to experience for them to make changes. We don't want to be like that person who was taken by a flood, regardless of the format of that flood, to realize Allah was worthy of my time and attention all along. We want to be a people who show Allah that we have taken the lesson that was intended for us from the story of Saba. And we do this by proving to Him that He is our main priority in our lives, by turning a brand new page in our lives and making Allah and the home of the hereafter the number one priority in our existence. These are some of the reflections we can take from the Surah Saba. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from such a similar outcome, to make us amongst those who are patient and grateful. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad walhamdulillah.